Stop. Before you scroll past this, I need you to hear something most men never get told. Not because it's uncomfortable, not because it's a secret someone is actively protecting, but because what I'm going to share with you sits in a blind spot that most men never even know they have. And that blind spot has cost them more than they realize. Think about the last time a woman stayed on your mind after meeting her. You replayed the conversation. You noticed something specific she said, the way she turned a phrase, a single sentence that you couldn't quite put down. It wasn't everything she said. It was one moment. One thing that landed differently from everything else. Women do the same thing. Exactly the same thing. And the men who understand this, not the loudest men, not the most aggressive, not the ones with the sharpest lines, are the ones she's still thinking about at midnight when she should be asleep. They left something inside her that she can't immediately name, a specific residue of presence. That's what this video is about. Not manipulation, not scripted lines to memorize. What we're going to explore today is the psychology behind why certain words from certain men create that effect, why they lodge themselves in a woman's mind like a song she can't stop humming, and why most men, despite being smart, capable, experienced men, never figure this out. Here's the part that surprises people. The words themselves are simple. 3 words or short phrases, deceptively ordinary on the surface. The difference is entirely in the man who says them and what those words signal about who he is. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just what to say, but why it works, and why you've probably said it wrong before without knowing it. If this channel is new to you, the conversations here are built specifically for men who are ready to look at attraction, relationships, and masculine presence with real depth. Not shortcuts, not performance. Subscribe now if that's the kind of conversation you want to keep having. Let me set something up before we get into the 3 phrases, because if you don't understand this foundation, the phrases themselves won't make sense. Neuroscientist Dr. Helen Fisher at Rutgers University has spent decades mapping what happens in a woman's brain when she's experiencing attraction. One of her most important findings: the brain doesn't store conversations. It stores emotional signatures. When a woman recalls an interaction that mattered to her, she isn't playing back a transcript. She's replaying a feeling, and then reconstructing the words that produced it. This is why 2 men can say almost the same sentence and produce completely different results. The words are carriers. What they're carrying is what matters. What mature men who've lived enough, lost enough, built enough, understand instinctively is that language is never just information. Every sentence communicates something about the man behind it. His confidence, his level of self-knowledge, his relationship with the woman's inner world, his willingness to be present without needing anything back immediately. Women aren't consciously analyzing this, but their nervous systems are reading it in real time, every time. Now here's what makes this paradoxical. The men who trigger this kind of deep, persistent thought in a woman's mind are not the men filling the conversation. They're the men who know when to say something precise. There's a study from the University of California that found that humans retain emotionally resonant information at 3 times the rate of neutral information. And that specificity is one of the primary drivers of emotional resonance. Specific language says, "I see you, I'm paying attention. I'm not here performing for everyone. I'm here for this." That's the key that unlocks everything that follows. Keep it in your mind as we go. The first phrase. I notice that. 3 words. One of the simplest constructions in the English language. Said by the wrong man in the wrong moment, it means nothing. Said by the right man at the right moment, it does something to a woman that she will still be feeling hours later. Imagine this. You're having a conversation. She says something. Not a big announcement. Not something she led with as important. Something small. A detail about something she cares about. or a quiet frustration she mentioned almost in passing. Most men let it go. They're tracking the main thread of the conversation, the practical content, the obvious exchanges. She notices, on some level, that it passed through without landing. It usually does. Then you say, "I noticed that," or the variation, "I caught that," or "I saw what you did there." What just happened in her nervous system is not small. You demonstrated something that the vast majority of men she's spoken with have never demonstrated. Selective attention. You weren't listening for what you expected to hear. You were listening for her, specifically. And what you heard, you held. You didn't need it to be relevant to anything. You didn't use it as a launching pad for your own story. You just named it. You saw her, and you said so. Dr. Sue Johnson, the founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy and the author of Hold Me Tight, has spent 30 years studying what women identify as the defining quality of a man they feel safe enough to open to. Her answer is consistent across thousands of cases. Attunement. Not attraction in the physical sense first. Attunement. The sense that he is tracking her experience and responding to what's actually there, not to what he needs to be there. "I noticed that" is attunement in 3 words. Marcus, 58, came to me after a period of several years of trying to re-enter dating after a long marriage. He was a successful man, good-looking for his age, reasonably confident. His problem, which took some time to surface, was that he spoke in broadcasts. Every conversation he had was a well-organized, articulate presentation of himself. Smart, professional, but essentially a monologue with pauses for acknowledgement. The woman in front of him was an audience, not a co-creator. I gave him one instruction. Stop presenting. Start noticing. When she says something that matters to her, even if it doesn't seem to matter to the conversation, name it. Don't analyze it. Don't ask why. Just name it. I noticed that. 2 months later, Marcus sent me a message. He said the first time he did it, on a dinner date with a woman he'd gone out with twice before without much forward movement. She paused, looked at him differently, and said, quote, "Most men don't catch things like that." The evening shifted. She opened in a way she hadn't before. Here's what I noticed that is really doing at a deeper level. It signals that your attention is not transactional. Most male attention, as women experience it in modern dating, is interest-based. Men pay attention to what they want, what they're hoping to get, what the conversation is moving toward. The moment a man pays attention to something he has no obvious stake in, something small, something that isn't about him, it creates a completely different signal. It says, "My attention is a gift." It's not payment for something. And gifts, particularly unexpected ones, are what women remember. The last thing to understand about this phrase is timing. It cannot be deployed as a technique. If she feels you calculated it, the effect reverses entirely. You have to actually notice things. You have to actually care enough to listen for what she's revealing, instead of what you want to hear. This is why it works differently for mature men. Younger men can mimic the phrase. Men who've developed genuine presence can only use it because it's true, and she will know the difference. Stay with me, because what comes next is the phrase that surprises men the most, and it's the one most of them actively avoid. The second phrase, "You were right." I know what just happened in your chest when you read that. A small contraction, a resistance, some version of, "That's not what this is about." And that reaction is precisely why we need to talk about this. Let me be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not talking about performative agreement. I'm not talking about being the man who capitulates every disagreement to keep the peace, who says, "You were right," to end a conflict he's too tired to have. She reads that immediately, and it does the opposite of what we're discussing. It communicates weakness, not wisdom. What I'm talking about is something much more specific and much more rare. Picture this scenario. The two of you had a conversation. Last week? Last month? Some time ago. She said something. Maybe it was about you. Maybe it was about a situation. Maybe it was a prediction. You didn't fully receive it at the time. Maybe you dismissed it. Maybe you disagreed. Maybe you just moved on. Then time passed, and life showed you she was right. And instead of letting it quietly dissolve into the past, instead of doing what almost every man does, which is simply move forward as though the moment of her being right didn't happen, you came back. You looked at her and said, "You were right." Not as an apology, not in the middle of an argument, not as a bargaining chip, just as a fact, stated cleanly, with no defense and no deflection. Research from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology consistently finds that the ability to revise one's position, to update based on new information, and to acknowledge the update openly, is rated by women as one of the highest markers of genuine intelligence and emotional maturity in men. It's not the admission itself that creates attraction. It's what the admission signals: that his ego is not more important than the truth, that he is not managing her perception of him more carefully than he is managing his own honesty. For most men, saying "you were right" feels like a concession of territory. What it actually is, when done from genuine recognition rather than appeasement, is a demonstration of self-security. Only men who are not threatened by the truth can say it simply and fully, and a woman who encounters that, who sees a man hold his own previous position up to the light, find it wanting, and say so without theater, experiences something she remembers. Gerald, 64, told me about the night he thinks something shifted permanently in his relationship with the woman who is now his partner. They'd had a disagreement about a mutual friend. She'd expressed a concern about the friend's intentions. Gerald had defended the friend, and essentially told her she was overthinking it. Months later, the situation played out exactly as she'd described. Gerald sat across from her and said, without any preamble, without any self-protective framing, "You were right about him. I didn't see it because I didn't want to. You saw it clearly." She told him later that it was the first time in her adult life a man had said those words to her without some form of self-justification attached. They've been together for 4 years. This is the deeper architecture of what "you were right" communicates. It tells her that she is someone whose perceptions are taken seriously, not patronized, not occasionally validated when convenient, but genuinely considered evidence. For a woman who has spent years, as most women have, having her observations dismissed, minimized, or turned into an argument about her emotional state rather than her accuracy, a man who returns to a moment and says "you were right" is offering something extraordinary. He's telling her that being seen by him is real, that his eyes are open, not performing openness. The mistake men make with this one is waiting until they have no choice but to say it, under pressure, during conflict, when she's angry and needs to be diffused. That version strips the phrase of everything that makes it powerful. The version that lives rent-free in her mind is the one she didn't ask for, didn't demand, didn't create the conditions for. The one you brought to her on a Tuesday afternoon because it was true, and she deserved to hear it. We're going deeper now. What comes next is the phrase I believe is the most underused by men over 50, and the one with the deepest long-term effect. On the surface, the most ordinary request in human conversation. The kind of thing that gets said in business meetings, in therapy offices, at networking events. You've heard it. You've probably said it. And if you've said it the way most men say it, it almost certainly didn't do what it's capable of doing. Here's the difference. "Tell me more," said by a man who is waiting for his turn to speak, is a filler. She knows it. Women have extraordinarily sensitive internal detection systems for whether a man is listening to her or listening for a pause in her voice to speak. That system has been calibrated across years, across hundreds of conversations where the interest was performed, not real. She knows. She always knows. "Tell me more," said by a man who is genuinely in suspension, who has set down everything he knows, everything he was going to say, everything he was about to feel, and given himself entirely to what she's about to give him, is one of the most powerful things a human being can say to another human being. Let me explain what it does neurologically. When a person feels genuinely listened to, not performed to, not processed, but actually received, the brain releases oxytocin. Dr. Paul Zak at Claremont Graduate University has documented this in research spanning over a decade. The experience of being truly heard activates the same neurological pathways as physical touch. This is not metaphor. The body of a woman who feels genuinely listened to is in a different chemical state than the body of a woman who is being patiently tolerated through her sentences. "Tell me more" is an invitation into that chemical state, but only if it's real. Here is what makes mature men uniquely capable of saying this phrase in a way that young men cannot. To say, "tell me more," and mean it, requires that you've already processed enough of your own interior landscape that you can actually set it down for a while. Men in their 40s, 50s, 60s who have done the work of living, who've lost things and built things and let go of things and faced themselves honestly. Those men have often developed the capacity to be genuinely curious about another person, not because they've run out of things to say, but because they've learned that what she carries is actually interesting, that her experience of the world is different from his, and therefore valuable to know. Young men are often so preoccupied with managing their own presentation, so concerned with whether they're impressive, whether they're landing well, whether they're getting what they want, that they have no bandwidth for actual curiosity. A mature man who has moved past needing to constantly prove himself has something remarkable to offer: his full attention, with nothing being managed behind it. She will feel that. The contrast between a man who says, "Tell me more," and means it, versus the 1,000 men who said it while already composing their response. That contrast is so extreme that she will feel it in her body before she can articulate why this conversation feels different. Thomas, 61, described to me a conversation he had on a third date with a woman he'd been cautiously optimistic about. They were talking about her work. She manages a program for at-risk youth, something she's built over 15 years, something that is the central current of her life. He said she'd started to explain it with the slightly abbreviated, slightly apologetic cadence people use when they're not sure anyone actually wants the full version. Halfway through a sentence, she started to contract, and he leaned forward and said simply, "Tell me more. I want the whole version." She stopped, looked at him, and spent the next 45 minutes talking about her life's work with the kind of openness he'd never seen from her before. She told him later that she'd walked home from that dinner and cried, not from sadness, but because she'd felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was speaking to someone who wanted her complete. Not edited, not manageable, complete. They've been together 2 years. Here is what "Tell me more" is doing at its deepest level. It is telling her that she is not a problem to be understood so that she can be handled more efficiently. She is a world to be explored because the exploring is worthwhile. That distinction between the man who listens to manage her and the man who listens to know her is one she has been searching for, consciously or not, for most of her adult life. And when she finds it, it doesn't leave her mind. You become the reference point. The man she compares to every subsequent interaction, every surface conversation, every man who talks at her instead of toward her. Not because you said something impressive, because you said something true, in a way that proved you were actually there. Now step back and look at all three. I noticed that. You were right. Tell me more. What is the common thread? None of them are about you. None of them put you at the center of the conversation. All three of them direct your energy, your attention, your intelligence toward her. And yet none of them are submissive. None of them erase you. A man who notices things is paying careful attention. That is presence. A man who can say, "You were right," is secure enough to tell the truth. That is strength. A man who says, "Tell me more," and means it is curious, open, genuinely interested. That is confidence at its most refined form, because it takes a man who is not afraid of what she might reveal. This is the thing most men never figure out. The kind of presence that makes a woman think about you at midnight is not made of impressive content. It's made of quality of contact. The feeling she has when she's in conversation with you. The sense that you are entirely there. That she matters to you not as a conquest, but as a person. That your attention is something real. That is what creates the kind of attraction that persists. That echoes. A study from the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that women rate feeling genuinely understood as more predictive of long-term romantic interest than physical attraction. Not because physical attraction doesn't matter, it does, but because understanding is rare. Understanding is so rare that when a woman encounters it, she doesn't let go easily. You don't need more techniques, you need more presence. And these 3 phrases, when they come from a man who has built that presence, are not lines, they're evidence. Before we get to the last part of this, and the last thing I want to share with you is the one truth that ties all of this together, I want to take a moment to say something directly. If what we've covered today landed differently than the usual content you find in this space, if it felt more like a conversation than a tutorial, that's intentional. The goal here has never been to give men a toolkit for appearing to be something they're not. The goal is to close the gap between who you actually are and how clearly you let that come through. Most men have more depth than they ever allow a woman to see, not because they're hiding it, because no one ever told them how to let it out. If this channel is the kind of resource that helps you close that gap, if these conversations feel like something you want to keep having, there's a way to support this work directly, and it matters more than you might think. The link is in the first comment. It's voluntary. It's not a transaction. It's how independent conversations like this one stay independent. If you've gotten value, that's where you show it. Here's the truth that ties all 3 phrases together. The reason these words leave a mark is not the words themselves. It's the man who has become someone capable of saying them without calculation. You can write down, "I noticed that," and practice it in front of a mirror. You can rehearse, "You were right," until it sounds natural. You can use "Tell me more" in every conversation for the next 30 days. And if none of those things are real, if the noticing isn't genuine, if the acknowledgement isn't clean, if the curiosity is manufactured, she will know. Not consciously, not immediately, but in her body. In the quiet after the conversation, when she's asking herself how she feels and can't quite make the feeling add up, the men who stay in her mind after midnight are not men who said the right thing. They're men who have become someone real enough that everything they say carries weight. That kind of man doesn't perform attention. He gives it. He doesn't admit she's right to manage her. He says it because it's true, and he respects her enough to say so. He doesn't ask her to tell him more to keep the conversation going. He asks because he actually wants to know. This is what mature masculinity looks like when it's quiet. Not loud, not aggressive, not constantly asserting itself. Quiet, present, specific. Capable of seeing someone fully and letting them know they've been seen. That is the quality that lives in a woman's mind after the conversation ends. Not the suit, not the accent, not the status. The feeling of having been truly, completely, unhurriedly present for. When you become that man, not by performing, but by doing the work of actually becoming, the words take care of themselves. You notice things because you're actually paying attention. You say she was right because you're secure enough not to need to protect your position. You ask her to tell you more because her inner world genuinely interests you. And she lies awake that night not because you impressed her, but because she felt something she wasn't prepared for. Because in a world of men who speak at women, she encountered a man who spoke toward her. And she doesn't quite know what to do with that. She turns it over in her mind, the way you turn over something precious that you're not ready to put down yet. That's what you're building, not a technique, a self. I want to leave you with a question, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. Of the 3 phrases we talked about today, which one have you used in the past without understanding what it was doing? Or which one have you never used but now you see differently? I have my own observations from these conversations, but yours are different, and the comments here are always some of the most honest, substantive discussions I encounter anywhere. Don't hold back. And if this video reached you at a moment when you needed it, not as information, but as permission to be a different kind of man in your conversations, consider sharing it with someone who might need it today. Here's one more thing I want you to take away. Everything we covered today, the noticing, the acknowledgement, the genuine curiosity, all of it lives or dies based on one underlying condition: whether or not you actually respect her. Not in the formal sense, in the real sense. Whether you find women, specifically this woman, genuinely worth your full attention. Not because you want something, because she's a person with a complete inner life that you haven't fully explored yet. If that's true for you, if women feel like interesting territory, not obstacles or targets, these phrases are the natural language of who you already are. You've just been given the words for it. If it's not quite true yet, if you're still in the space of transactional attention, of listening to manage rather than listening to know, that's not a flaw. It's a starting point, and this is the direction. You already know more about women's inner lives than you did 20 minutes ago. More importantly, you know something about your own. What you do with that is entirely up to you. I'll see you in the next one.